You need to understand right now that what is happening in Washington and New York City is not just a headline or a political circus, but a direct threat to the safety, freedom, and bank account of every single law-abiding citizen in this country. We are standing on the precipice of a total collapse of the American legal standard, and if you think this is just about one man in Mar-a-Lago, you are dead wrong, because the precedent they are setting today is the weapon they will use against you tomorrow. When the government decides that the law is no longer a shield to protect the innocent but a sword to destroy political enemies, we have ceased to be a constitutional republic and have officially entered the territory of a banana republic. The hearing we just witnessed on Capitol Hill was not merely a debate about legal procedures or jurisdiction, but it was a battle for the very soul of American justice. The Republican members of Congress were there trying to shine a light on the darkest chapter of our modern history, where a weaponized judicial system is actively interfering in a presidential election. They were there to call out the obvious corruption, the two-tiered system of justice, and the undeniable fact that the trial in New York against President Trump is nothing short of a coordinated hit job. But then you have the other side, represented perfectly by the likes of Representative JASMINE CROCKETT, who sat there and attempted to gaslight the American people into believing that this is all just normal, standard operating procedure. It is infuriating to watch these politicians look into the camera and tell you not to believe your own lying eyes, acting as if a partisan district attorney running on a campaign promise to get Trump is somehow a beacon of blind justice. They hide behind technicalities and lectures about civics, claiming that we need to respect the process, but they ignore the reality that the process itself has been hijacked by radical leftists who care more about power than they do about the Constitution. Let's dig into the nonsense that was spewed regarding the so-called separation of powers and the independence of these state trials. Representative Crockett and her allies want you to believe that what is happening in Manhattan is completely isolated from the White House and the Department of Justice, which is an insult to the intelligence of every voter in this country. We know for a fact that the number 3 official from the Biden DOJ was deployed to the Manhattan DA's office to help resurrect a zombie case that everyone else, including the previous DA and federal prosecutors, had already passed on. To claim that this is just a local matter involving a jury of peers is one of the most dishonest framing tactics I have ever heard in my 20 years of covering politics. Let's talk about this so-called jury of peers in a jurisdiction where Joe Biden won nearly 90% of the vote. When you drag a Republican frontrunner into a courtroom in the heart of the most liberal city in America, preside over it with a donor-class judge whose family is profiting off the trial, and then claim this is a fair and impartial exercise of the law, you are laughing in the face of due process. The Democrats love to talk about the rule of law when it suits them, but what they are actually practicing is rule by law, where the legal code is twisted and manipulated to target specific individuals. Crockett's defense of this sham trial relies on the idea that we should just blindly trust the institutions. But why should we trust institutions that have been weaponized against conservatives for the last decade? From the IRS targeting the Tea Party to the FBI spying on the Trump campaign based on a fake dossier, we have seen a pattern of behavior that proves the system is rigged, and this trial is just the latest and most dangerous iteration of that corruption. What makes this congressional hearing so critical is that it exposes the absolute arrogance of the left. They truly believe that if they wrap their authoritarian tactics in the language of judicial independence and state sovereignty, the American people will be too stupid to notice that they are rigging the game. They lecture us about how the federal government can't get involved in a state case, conveniently forgetting that they have federalized everything else in our lives, from our light bulbs to our school curriculums. This argument that the House of Representatives has no business inquiring into the abuses of a local prosecutor is legally and morally bankrupt. When a local prosecutor targets a federal candidate and a former president using a novel legal theory that relies on federal election law, that ceases to be a local issue and becomes a national crisis. Congress has every right, and indeed a duty, to investigate whether federal funds are being used to subsidize this political persecution and whether our civil rights laws are being violated by prosecutors who are acting like political activists. The defense put forward by Crockett, that this is just the justice system working as intended, is terrifying because it implies that they intend to keep doing this. If they can rewrite the statute of limitations, conjure up felonies out of misdemeanors, and gag a defendant from speaking in his own defense during an election year, then there is no limit to what they can do to a regular business owner or a concerned parent. This is the Soviet-style tactic of show me the man and I'll show you the crime, and it is antithetical to everything the Founding Fathers fought for. We have to understand the economic and social fallout of this kind of lawfare because it goes way beyond politics. When the legal system becomes unpredictable and partisan, it destroys the stability that is necessary for a free market to function. Business owners and investors are watching New York and thinking that if the state can seize assets and destroy a real estate empire based on victimless crimes where the banks actually made money, then no one's property is safe. The left's obsession with destroying Trump is causing them to burn down the pillars of American prosperity, and apologists like Crockett are cheering while the flames rise. During the hearing, the contrast could not have been starker between those who want to expose the truth and those who want to hide it behind procedural jargon. The Republicans were asking the hard questions about the coordination, the funding, and the unprecedented nature of these charges. The Democrats, on the other hand, were performing a theatrical defense of a broken system, trying to convince us that the sky is green and that political prosecutions are actually the highest form of patriotism. It is particularly rich to hear them talk about the sanctity of the jury system in this specific context. We all know that in a highly charged political trial, the venue is everything, and denying a change of venue in a case like this is essentially directing a verdict before the first witness is even sworn in. They know this, and that is why they chose this jurisdiction. It is not about justice. It is about geography and demographics. It is about ensuring that the deck is stacked so high that no amount of evidence or exoneration can overcome the bias of the tribunal. Representative Crockett's remarks about how the federal government is separate from the state courts ignore the reality of the political ecosystem we live in today. The Democrat Party operates as a unified machine, with messaging, funding, and strategy flowing from the top down. To suggest that Alvin Bragg is operating in a vacuum, completely uninfluenced by the rhetoric and desires of the Biden administration, is to believe in fairy tales. We have seen the clips, we have heard the rhetoric, and we know that Get Trump is the unifying plank of their entire platform because they cannot run on their disastrous record on the border, inflation, or foreign policy. This hearing also touched on the personal toll this takes on the individuals involved, but the Democrats only seem to have empathy when it fits their narrative. They offer condolences for personal losses, which is fine and proper, but they turn around and support a system that seeks to imprison their political opponent for 100 years over paperwork disputes. There is a profound moral disconnect in their worldview where they can preach about compassion and dignity while simultaneously cheering for the destruction of a man and his family simply because he dares to challenge their grip on power. The invocation of the Constitution by the left in this hearing is perhaps the most offensive part of the entire spectacle. They use the Constitution as a prop when it serves them, but they shred it the moment it stands in the way of their agenda. Where is their concern for the Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial? Where is their concern for the First Amendment right to free speech, which is being trampled by unconstitutional gag orders? They are silent on these actual constitutional crises because they are the ones creating them. When we listen to the arguments made by the GOP members, we hear the voice of common sense breaking through the noise. They are asking the questions that regular Americans are asking at their dinner tables. Why is this happening now, right before an election? Why are they using legal theories that have never been used before? Why is the judge a donor to the opponent? These are not conspiracy theories. These are basic questions of fairness that any objective observer would ask. The attempt by Crockett to frame the Republican inquiry as an attack on the rule of law is a classic projection tactic. They accuse you of doing exactly what they are doing. They are the ones attacking the rule of law by turning the justice system into a political weapon, yet they accuse the Republicans of undermining the system simply for pointing it out. It is the logic of the abuser who blames the victim for speaking up. We need to be clear that this hearing is just one skirmish in a much larger war. The strategy of the left is to tie up the Republican candidate in courtrooms so he cannot campaign, to drain his resources, and to brand him a criminal in the hopes that it will sway the independent vote. It is election interference, plain and simple, and it is being funded by your tax dollars and facilitated by officials who took an oath to uphold the Constitution, not the Democratic Party platform. The dismissal of the weaponization argument by the Democrats shows just how out of touch, or perhaps how complicit, they really are. They act as if the term weaponization is just a buzzword invented by right-wing media, rather than an accurate description of the reality we are living in. When you have the FBI raiding the home of a former president over documents that every other president has taken, while giving a pass to the current president for doing the same thing but with less security, that is weaponization. When you have pro-life activists being thrown in jail while firebombers of pregnancy centers go free, that is weaponization. JASMINE Crockett's defense of the New York trial is a defense of this entire rotten structure. She is defending a system that has decided that the end justifies the means. If the end is stopping Donald Trump and preserving the power of the administrative state, then any means, no matter how corrupt, unconstitutional, or destructive to the country, is justified in their eyes. This is the danger we face. It is not just about bad policy anymore. It is about a fundamental abandonment of the principles of blind justice. The way they talk about the grand jury process is another deception. As the old saying goes, a prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. The grand jury hears only what the prosecutor wants them to hear. In a place like New York, getting an indictment against Trump was never in doubt. It was a foregone conclusion. To present that indictment as some sort of holy writ that cannot be questioned is ridiculous. It is the fruit of a poison tree. We must also look at the timing of all of this. For years, these prosecutors sat on these cases. They only sprang into action when it became clear that Trump was running again and that he was leading in the polls. This is not a coincidence. It is a calculation. The Democrats in that hearing room know this. They know that if Trump were retired and playing golf, none of these charges would have ever been brought. But because he represents a threat to the establishment, the machinery was turned on. Crockett's lecture on the separation of the federal and state systems completely ignores the concept of federal civil rights oversight. If a state government was systematically denying voting rights to a specific group, the federal government would intervene immediately, and rightly so. Well, here we have a state government systematically denying the civil rights of a presidential candidate and, by extension, the tens of millions of Americans who want to vote for him. That is a federal civil rights issue of the highest order. The refusal of the Democrats to acknowledge even the appearance of impropriety is telling. A reasonable person, even a liberal one, should be able to look at this and say, you know, having the judge's daughter work for a firm that raises millions off this trial looks bad. But they won't even admit that. They circle the wagons and attack anyone who dares to point out the conflict of interest. This absolute refusal to engage with reality is why the country is so divided. You cannot find common ground with people who refuse to admit that 2 + 2 is equal to 4. As we move forward in this script, we are going to continue to peel back the layers of this onion. We are going to look at how this specific hearing fits into the broader pattern of the last 4 years. We are going to expose the hypocrisy of the people who screamed Russia, Russia, Russia for years based on lies, and who are now screaming justice, justice, justice while perverting it. The fight in that committee room is the fight for the survival of the American experiment. The Democrats like Crockett want you to think that the Republicans are wasting time with these hearings. They say we should be focused on real issues. But what issue is more real than the fact that the government is trying to jail its political opposition? If we lose the rule of law, we don't have a country to fix the other issues in. Inflation matters, the border matters, crime matters, but without a fair justice system, we are just serfs living on a plantation run by the elites in DC. So when you hear them talk about defending the institutions, remember which institutions they are defending. They are defending the bureaucracy, the swamp, and the deep state. They are defending their own power. They are not defending you. They are not defending the Constitution. They are defending their right to rule over you without challenge. And that is why they hate Trump, and that is why they hate anyone who stands up to them. Let's keep pulling this thread, because the more you unravel it, the uglier the picture gets. We need to talk about the specific legal gymnastics that Representative Crockett and her colleagues are so desperately trying to defend. They keep telling us that no one is above the law. That is their favorite talking point. They recite it like a religious mantra. But what they really mean is no Republican is protected by the law, and no Democrat is bound by it. Think about the absurdity of the case in New York that sparked this entire congressional debate. We are talking about a bookkeeping entry from years ago, a private transaction, a non-disclosure agreement, which, by the way, is a completely legal instrument used by businesses and celebrities every single day in this country. Yet, Alvin Bragg, a man who has downgraded actual violent felonies to misdemeanors, decided to take this misdemeanor past the statute of limitations and magically inflate it into a felony. How? By linking it to a federal election crime that the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice looked at and said, "There is nothing here." Do you see the circular logic? The state prosecutor says it's a felony because of a federal crime. The federal government says there was no federal crime. So you have a state felony built on a phantom federal offense. This is not the law. This is alchemy. This is a Frankenstein monster of a legal theory stitched together for one purpose only: to put the name Trump and felon in the same sentence before November. And when Republicans in Congress call this out, JASMINE CROCKETT accuses them of not understanding the law. It is the height of gaslighting. And let's not ignore the elephant in the room that the Democrats in that hearing tried to sweep under the rug: Matthew Colangelo. This is a name you need to know. He wasn't just some local prosecutor working his way up in Manhattan. No, he was the number 3 guy at the Biden Department of Justice. He left a prestigious, high-ranking federal job to go work in a local district attorney's office for a fraction of the pay. Why would anyone do that? Unless, of course, he was sent on a mission. Unless he was the connective tissue between the Biden White House and the Bragg prosecution. When Republicans ask about Colangelo, the Democrats act like it's a conspiracy theory. But it is right there on his LinkedIn profile. It is a matter of public record. The Biden administration sent their guy to get the job done because the local team wasn't moving fast enough. This destroys the entire argument that Crockett was making about the separation between the federal government and the state trial. There is no separation. It is one fluid operation of political destruction. The rhetoric we heard from Crockett in this hearing is designed to appeal to low-information voters who don't understand how the sausage is made. She talks about the grand jury as if it represents the voice of the people. But let's be real about Manhattan. You could walk down the street in Manhattan and find a grand jury that would indict a ham sandwich if you told them the ham sandwich voted for Trump. The jury pool is tainted beyond repair. In a fair system, a judge would move this trial to a neutral venue immediately. But Judge Merchan won't do that, because a conviction is the only goal. Speaking of the judge, can we talk about the gag order? This was a major point of contention underlying the tension in that hearing room. You have the leading candidate for the presidency of the United States, a man who is known for his ability to communicate, being told by a judge that he cannot speak about the people attacking him. Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels are out there on every cable news network trashing Trump, writing books, and making money off his name. But if Trump responds, he goes to jail. This is the constitutional process that Crockett is defending. Since when does the First Amendment have an exception clause that says unless you are Donald Trump? This gag order is election interference. It prevents the candidate from campaigning effectively. It prevents him from defending his reputation in the court of public opinion, which is the only court that actually matters in an election year. The Republicans in Congress are right to scream about this. It is un-American. It is the kind of thing you see in Turkey or Venezuela, not the United States of America. The Democrat strategy in this hearing was to portray the Republicans as whiners who just want to protect their dear leader. They use words like cult and sycophants. But look at what the Republicans are actually defending. They are defending the precedent. If they can do this to a billionaire former president with the best lawyers in the world, imagine what they can do to you. Imagine if a local prosecutor in a jurisdiction that hates your politics decides to look through your tax returns from 7 years ago, find a clerical error, and threaten you with prison unless you plead guilty. That is the world they are building. Representative Crockett's performance, and let's call it what it is, a performance, was tailored for social media. It was designed to get likes and shares from the TikTok generation. She speaks with that tone of condescending moral superiority that has become the trademark of the modern left. They don't debate you, they lecture you. They don't think you have a difference of opinion. They think you are a bad person. This moral arrogance allows them to justify any abuse of power because they believe they are on the right side of history. But history teaches us that the people who silence their opponents, the people who arrest their rivals, the people who rig the courts, they are never the good guys. Never. We also need to address the weaponization of Congress narrative that the Democrats were pushing. They claim that the Republicans are using the committee to interfere in a state trial. This is rich. The Democrats impeached Donald Trump twice, once for a phone call and once for a speech. They held a Soviet-style show trial on January 6th, where the defense wasn't even allowed to call witnesses. And now they have the audacity to complain that Republicans are using their subpoena power to investigate actual corruption. The hypocrisy is so thick you can cut it with a knife. The deeper issue here, which the transcripts of this hearing reveal between the lines, is the fear. The Democrats are terrified. They see the polls. They see that despite the indictments, despite the mugshot, despite the media smear campaign, Trump is gaining support. He is gaining among African Americans. He is gaining among Latinos. He is gaining among young men. The Lawfare strategy is backfiring. Instead of making him look like a criminal, it is making him look like a martyr. And that is why the rhetoric from people like Crockett is getting so aggressive. They are losing control of the narrative. They thought that once the word indicted flashed on the screen, the MAGA movement would crumble. But they forgot that the American people have a built-in detector for unfairness. We love the underdog, and we hate a bully. And right now, the entire legal system, backed by the media and the Democrat Party, is bullying one man. Let's pivot to the economic implications that were briefly touched upon but deserve a 60-minute deep dive. Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful, said it best, "I would never invest in New York now." Why? Because of what we are seeing in these hearings and trials. If the state can arbitrarily decide that your assets are worth a fraction of what the banks say they are worth, simply to fine you hundreds of millions of dollars, then capitalism is dead in that state. The Democrats in Congress don't seem to care about the business climate. They don't care that businesses are fleeing New York and California for Florida and Texas. They are willing to burn down the economy if it means they get to rule over the ashes. Crockett's defense of the New York system ignores the fact that the system is driving out the very tax base that funds her government programs. It is economic suicide in the name of political vengeance. Furthermore, look at the contrast in how they treat their own. Bob Menendez, walking around free. Hunter Biden. They tried to give him a sweetheart plea deal that would have buried his crimes forever until a judge caught them. Joe Biden. Found to have willfully retained classified documents, but is too elderly with a poor memory to be charged. This is the equality that Crockett preaches. It is a two-tiered system where the elites get a pass and the outsiders get the hammer. The hearing also exposed the complete lack of shame regarding the Russian collusion hoax. Remember, these are the same people who spent years telling us that Trump was a Putin agent. That was a lie manufactured by the Clinton campaign and fed to the FBI. We know this now. It is a fact. Yet, have any of them apologized? Has Adam Schiff apologized? Has the DOJ cleaned house? No. They just moved on to the next hoax, which is this insurrectionist narrative and these bogus legal cases. The credibility of these people is zero, yet they sit in Congress and lecture us about integrity. When you listen to the Republican members in this transcript, you hear the frustration of people who are trying to play by the rules while the other side is flipping over the board. They are asking for documents, they are asking for testimony, and they are being stonewalled. The Biden administration is the least transparent administration in history, despite their promises. They hide everything. They hide the hot tapes. They hide the communications between the White House and the DA's office. What are they afraid of? If this trial in New York was truly on the up and up, if it was truly just a state matter, they would have nothing to hide. They would welcome the transparency. They would say, "Look, here is the evidence. Here is the process. See for yourself." Instead, they fight every subpoena. They claim executive privilege over things that have nothing to do with the executive branch. That behavior tells you everything you need to know. Innocent people don't act like this. Honest governments don't act like this. We are witnessing the weaponization of the abstract concept of democracy to destroy actual democracy. They say, we have to stop Trump to save democracy. Think about what that means. They are saying they have to stop the people from voting for the candidate they want in order to save the system that allows people to vote. It is Orwellian doublespeak. They are destroying the village to save it. Representative Crockett represents the wing of the party that truly believes the ends justify the means. In their worldview, Trump is an existential threat, not because he is a dictator, but because he threatens the administrative state. He threatens the gravy train. He threatens the power of the unelected bureaucrats who actually run this town. That is why they are panicking. That is why they are breaking every norm and every tradition to stop him. And this hearing highlighted the role of the media in this ecosystem. Notice how Crockett's soundbites are perfectly crafted for CNN and MSNBC. She knows that the legacy media will not fact-check her. They will not ask her about Matthew Colangelo. They will not ask her about the statute of limitations. They will just play the clip of her dunking on a Republican and frame it as a victory for truth. We are fighting a war on two fronts, the legal front and the information front. The Republican pushback in this hearing was vital because it creates a record. It puts it in the history books that someone stood up and said no. Someone stood up and said, "This is wrong." Even if they can't stop the trial, even if the fix is in, it is crucial that we do not go silently into the night. We have to expose every conflict of interest, every procedural violation, and every political connection. We have to ask ourselves, what happens next? If they succeed in convicting Trump in this kangaroo court, what happens to the country? Half the country will see it as illegitimate. The other half will gloat. The division will deepen. The trust in the system will evaporate completely. This is what the Democrats are risking. They are risking the stability of the entire republic for a short-term political win. It is reckless. It is dangerous. And frankly, it is evil. You cannot have a functioning society without a neutral arbiter of disputes. The courts are supposed to be that arbiter. When you turn the courts into a political weapon, you revert to the law of the jungle. It becomes about raw power. I have the power to put you in jail, so I win. That is not America. That is the Soviet Union. That is not what our grandfathers fought for. And let's be clear, JASMINE CROCKETT and her allies know exactly what they are doing. They are not stupid. They are calculated. They are counting on the fact that you are too busy working, raising your kids, and paying your bills to pay attention to the details. They are counting on you reading the headlines and not the fine print. That is why we are doing this deep dive. That is why we are reading the transcripts. To show you the fine print. Because the devil is in the details, and right now, the devil is running the district attorney's office in Manhattan. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the absolute absurdity of the resources being poured into this charade. We have a southern border that is wide open, with millions of unvetted military-age males pouring into our country from adversarial nations. We have a fentanyl crisis that is killing over 100,000 Americans a year. That's a Vietnam War every single year. We have inflation crushing the working class, making it impossible for young families to buy a home or even afford groceries. And yet, what is the priority of the Democrat Party? What is the priority of the New York justice system? Spending millions of taxpayer dollars to figure out if Donald Trump categorized a legal expense correctly in a ledger from 2017. It is insulting. It is a slap in the face to every American who is struggling to get by. When JASMINE CROCKETT sits there and lectures us about the importance of this trial, she is telling you that getting Trump is more important than your safety, your wallet, and your children's future. They are burning down the house to kill a spider, except the spider is the only one trying to fix the foundation. Consider the crime itself. Let's strip away the legal mumbo-jumbo. They are saying that Trump paid his own lawyer with his own money to handle a private matter, and because he wrote legal expense in his checkbook instead of reimbursement for NDA negotiation, he should die in prison. Do you realize how insane that sounds? Every business in America books legal settlements as legal expenses. If this is the standard, then every CEO in the Fortune 500 should be looking over their shoulder. But we know this standard only applies to one man. If this were a Democrat, it would be a campaign finance violation at worst, a fine, a slap on the wrist, move on. Barack Obama's campaign was fined nearly $400,000 for reporting violations. Did anyone raid his home? Did anyone try to put him in Rikers Island? Of course not. Because mistakes in paperwork are usually treated as administrative issues, not felonies. But for Trump, they reinvent the wheel. And let's talk about the victim. In every crime, There is usually a victim. Who is the victim here? The banks? They testified that they loved doing business with Trump and made millions in interest. The tax man. Trump paid his taxes. The American public? How were you harmed by a private NDA signed years ago? You weren't. This is a victimless crime invented by prosecutors who needed a crime to fit the man. It is the definition of tyranny. Representative Crockett's defense of this process essentially boils down to, trust the experts. But these experts are the same people who told you the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. They are the same people who told you the vaccine would stop transmission 100%. They have lost the right to be trusted blindly. We need to verify everything, and when we verify the facts of this case, they crumble into dust. One of the most dangerous aspects of this entire saga, which the Republicans in Congress are trying to highlight, is the chilling effect. This isn't just about silencing Trump, it's about silencing anyone who would dare to work for him, support him, or defend him. Look at what they are doing to his lawyers. They are trying to disbar them. They are threatening them with their own indictments. They are sending a message to the legal community. If you represent Donald Trump, we will destroy your career. This deprives the former president of his Sixth Amendment right to counsel. If lawyers are too terrified to take the case because they don't want the Alvin Bragg treatment, then the system is rigged. Crockett ignores this completely. She talks about the process while her party is actively dismantling the safeguards that make the process fair. It is a war of attrition. They want to bankrupt him, exhaust him, and leave him alone on an island. But here is the beautiful irony that they didn't see coming. The American people are not buying it. Every time they indict him, his poll numbers go up. Why? Because Americans have a built-in sense of fairness. We know a bully when we see one. When we see the entire weight of the federal government, the state government, the media, and the corporate world crashing down on one guy, and he is still standing, still fighting, that commands respect. It makes their Orange Man bad narrative look petty and vindictive. The hearing also touched on the issue of precedent. The Democrats seem to think that once Trump is gone, everything will go back to normal. They are fools. You cannot uncork this bottle. Once you establish that you can arrest your political opponents for paperwork errors, that weapon is lying there for anyone to pick up. What happens when a Republican district attorney in a deep red state decides to look into the Clinton Foundation? Or the Biden family's business dealings in China and Ukraine? The Republicans in that hearing are actually the ones trying to save the Democrats from themselves. They are saying, don't go down this road, because it leads to the destruction of the Republic. But the Democrats are so blinded by their hatred for Trump that they don't care about the collateral damage. They are like Captain Ahab chasing the white whale, willing to sink the ship and kill the crew just to get their harpoon into him. Let's dig deeper into the hush money terminology that the media and Crockett love to use. They use it because it sounds illicit. It sounds criminal. But in the legal world, it's called a non-disclosure agreement, NDA. Congress, the very body where JASMINE CROCKETT sits, has a taxpayer-funded slush fund that has paid out millions to settle harassment claims against members of Congress. Did you know that? Your tax dollars were used to silence victims of congressional misconduct. So, let me get this straight. It is perfectly fine for Congress to use your money to shut people up about their bad behavior, but it is a felony for Donald Trump to use his own money to protect his family from embarrassment? The hypocrisy is so radioactive it could power a nuclear plant. If JASMINE CROCKETT wants to talk about ethics and hush money, maybe she should start by auditing the books of the House of Representatives. But she won't do that, because that would expose her own team. This is why the two-tiered justice argument resonates so strongly. It is not a slogan. It is an observable reality. We see it every day. We see peaceful pro-life grandmothers being sentenced to prison for praying at clinics, while Antifa rioters who burn down police stations get charges dropped. We see Trump's home raided by SWAT teams for documents, while Biden's lawyers are allowed to politely search his garage and hand over what they want. The Republican strategy in this hearing, to subpoena the communications, to drag the truth into the light, is the only recourse we have left. The legislative branch has to check the judicial branch when the judicial branch goes rogue. And make no mistake, the New York judicial system has gone rogue. It is acting like a sovereign state within a state, unmoored from the Constitution. When Crockett says, "This is a state matter, stay out of it," she is arguing for a form of confederacy where states can violate federal civil rights at will. It is a bizarre argument coming from a Democrat, traditionally the party of federal intervention. But they switch their principles like they switch their masks. If federalism helps Trump, they hate it. If states' rights hurt Trump, they love them. They have no core principles other than the accumulation of power. We also need to address the election interference angle more directly. The timing is everything. They want this trial to dominate the news cycle during the peak of the campaign season. They want Trump sitting in a freezing courtroom in Manhattan instead of holding rallies in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. They want to drain his war chest into legal fees instead of ad buys. This is a coordinated political strategy masquerading as justice. Imagine if this were happening in Russia. Imagine if Putin's main opponent was facing 91 indictments on vague charges right before an election. The US State Department would issue a statement condemning the deterioration of democracy and political persecution. The New York Times would write editorials about the brave dissident fighting the regime. But when it happens right here at home, the media cheers. They are state-run media in all but name. The behavior of Judge Merchan, who donated to Biden and whose daughter works for Democrat campaigns, is a disgrace to the bench. In any other case, recusal would be automatic. The appearance of bias alone is enough to step down. But he refuses. Why? Because he has a job to do. He is not there to referee a fair fight. He is there to ensure the outcome. He is a political operative in a black robe. And the jury instructions? We've seen in other cases against Trump where the judges give instructions that make it almost impossible not to convict. They lower the burden of proof. They allow hearsay. They manipulate the rules of evidence. It is a show trial. It is theatre. And JASMINE CROCKETT is one of the ushers, showing you to your seat and telling you to enjoy the execution. But let's talk about the man himself for a second. Donald Trump. Love him or hate him, you have to admire the resilience. Most men would have folded years ago. Most men would have taken a plea deal, paid a fine, and retired to the golf course to save their family the stress. But he stands there, day after day, taking the arrows for us. He said it himself, "They're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way." And that is the core truth of this entire 60-minute script. This is not about Donald Trump the person. It is about Donald Trump the symbol. He represents the uprising of the forgotten American. The people who are tired of being told what to drive, what to cook, what to think, and how to raise their kids. He represents the rejection of the globalist agenda. And that is why the system hates him with such a burning passion. If they can crush him, they crush the movement. If they can show that even a billionaire ex-president can be destroyed by the deep state, then what chance do you have? That is the message they are sending. It is a message of intimidation. Sit down, shut up, and take your booster, or we will destroy you. But the hearing showed that the Republicans are finally fighting back. For years, we had the weak-knees caucus, the Paul Ryans, the Mitt Romneys, who would apologize for being conservative. Now, we have a new breed. Fighters. People who aren't afraid to call out the corruption to its face. They are using the transcript of this hearing to expose the rot. Representative Crockett tries to paint herself as the voice of reason, the voice of the law. But her version of the law is a weapon. It is a tool of oppression. Real law is blind. Real law treats the janitor and the CEO the same. Real law doesn't care about your political party. That version of the law is dead in New York City. We must also look at the role of the never-Trump Republicans in this. They are quiet, aren't they? They are secretly hoping Bragg succeeds so they can take their party back. They want to go back to the days of losing with dignity. They want to go back to the country club and get invited to the cocktail parties in D.C. They don't care about the base. They don't care about the country. They only care about their social standing. They are just as complicit as the Democrats. This script needs to serve as a wake-up call. If you are watching this and thinking, well, I don't like Trump's tweets, so maybe he deserves it, you are missing the point. You are the frog in the boiling water. Today it's Trump. Tomorrow it's Elon Musk. The day after that, it's you because you posted a meme they didn't like, or you donated to the wrong cause, or you refused to use the correct pronouns. The slope is slippery, and we are already sliding down it at breakneck speed. The 34 felonies in New York are a joke. Everyone knows it. Even legal scholars on the left, people who hate Trump, have written op-eds saying this case is a stretch. They know it's weak. But they don't care about the legal strength. They care about the headline, Trump convicted. They want that branding iron. Crockett knows that most people won't read the indictment. They won't understand the complex interplay between state and federal statutes. They will just hear guilty. That is the goal. It is a psychological operation, PSYOP, against the American electorate. They are trying to demoralize us into staying home in November. But looking at the transcripts, looking at the fire in the eyes of the GOP representatives, I don't think it's working. The more they push, the harder the pushback becomes. This hearing wasn't a victory for the Democrats. It was an exposure. It showed exactly who they are, petty tyrants who will twist the law into a pretzel to hold onto power. As we move to the final sections of this script, we need to talk about the future. What happens if they actually put him in jail? What happens to the Secret Service? It creates a constitutional absurdity. But beyond the logistics, it creates a martyr. It validates everything Trump has said about the swamp. In a way, they are handing him the election on a silver platter, wrapped in an indictment. So, let them have their hearings. Let JASMINE CROCKETT make her viral clips. Let Alvin Bragg have his press conferences. They are playing checkers while Trump is playing 4D chess. They are revealing themselves to be exactly what we always suspected, a corrupt ruling class that fears the people. And in America, the people are supposed to be in charge. Let's get real about the geography of this injustice because the location of this trial is not an accident. It is the weapon. In the 2020 election, Donald Trump received roughly 12% of the vote in Manhattan, which means that statistically speaking, nearly 9 out of every 10 people walking down the street already hate him. When JASMINE CROCKETT talks about a jury of peers, she is insulting your intelligence because a peer implies someone who can look at you without a pre-existing bias. In this venue, finding an impartial jury is like trying to find a polar bear in the Sahara Desert. It is a statistical impossibility. The Democrats know this, the judge knows this, and Alvin Bragg certainly knows this, which is why they fought tooth and nail to keep the case in the city instead of moving it to Staten Island or upstate New York where fairness might actually exist. This geographic bias is compounded by the intense social pressure that exists in these deep blue enclaves. Imagine being a juror in this trial and knowing that if you vote to acquit Donald Trump, your name will be leaked, your face will be on every news channel, and you will be a pariah in your own community. You would be harassed at the grocery store, your kids would be bullied at school, and you might even lose your job. The system is designed to coerce a guilty verdict through fear and intimidation, not through evidence. This is what mob justice looks like in the modern era, only now the mob wears suits and sits in air-conditioned courtrooms. We need to circle back to the terrifying precedent this sets for the American economy, specifically the real estate market. The underlying logic of the civil fraud case, which feeds into this criminal case, was that Trump overvalued his assets to get loans, even though the banks did their own due diligence and were paid back in full with interest. Judge Engoron, with a straight face, claimed that Mar-a-Lago, one of the most premier properties in the entire world, was worth only $18 million. That is the price of a nice house in the Hamptons, not a historic club on the ocean in Palm Beach. When the government starts arbitrarily assigning values to private property that contradict the free market, we have ceased to be a capitalist society and have embraced the command economy of a communist regime. This is why business titans are sounding the alarm. They see that if a judge can wake up on the wrong side of the bed and decide your business is a fraud because he disagrees with your valuation, then no business is safe. It creates an environment of total uncertainty where investment freezes and capital flees to safer jurisdictions. JASMINE CROCKETT and her squad in Congress don't understand this because most of them have never signed the front of a paycheck in their lives. They view the economy as a piggy bank to be raided for their pet projects, not a delicate ecosystem that relies on the rule of law to function. The hypocrisy of the states' rights argument coming from the Democrats in this hearing is enough to make your head spin. For decades, the left has pushed for federal control over everything, arguing that the federal government must intervene in states to ensure equity and justice. They wanted federal control over elections, federal control over policing, and federal control over zoning laws. But the moment a rogue state prosecutor targets a Republican president, suddenly they become the world's biggest champions of state sovereignty. Oh, Congress can't interfere, they cry. This is a local matter. It is intellectual dishonesty of the highest order. They don't care about the principle of federalism. They care about the utility of the weapon. Let's look at the coordination again because it cannot be overstated. You have Fani Willis in Georgia, Alvin Bragg in New York, Letitia James in New York, and Jack Smith in D.C. They all popped up at the exact same time. They all coordinate their filings. They all visit the White House. If this were a group of Republican prosecutors targeting a Democrat, the media would be calling it a RICO conspiracy. They would be connecting the dots with red string on a board every night on the news. But because it's Trump, they pretend these are all independent, spontaneous events. It is a synchronized assault designed to bleed him dry and keep him off the campaign trail. The Republicans on the committee are the only ones asking the question, who is paying for this? We know that millions of dollars from left-wing nonprofits and dark money groups have poured into these DA races. George Soros and his affiliated networks have realized that you don't need to win the presidency to change the country. You just need to buy the local prosecutors. For a few $1,000,000, you can install radical activists in key cities who will refuse to prosecute real criminals while hunting down political enemies. This is the Soros DA phenomenon, and Alvin Bragg is the poster child for it. Representative Crockett's attempt to paint the Republican investigation as obstruction is a classic inversion of reality. Congress has oversight authority. If federal funds are being used by these local officers, and they are, then Congress has the right to ask how that money is being spent. If these prosecutions are interfering with a federal election, and they are, then Congress has a duty to investigate the election interference. The Democrats are trying to neuter the legislative branch to protect their lawfare operation. They want a Congress that writes checks but asks no questions. We also have to talk about the crime of being a Republican in New York. The transcript of the hearing reveals a deep disdain for conservative values. The subtext of Crockett's argument is that Trump and his supporters are inherently suspicious, inherently guilty, and deserving of whatever punishment the state can dream up. This dehumanization is the first step in any authoritarian takeover. You have to convince the public that the other is so dangerous, so evil, that normal rules don't apply. That is why they call us MAGA extremists. It is language designed to justify the suspension of civil liberties. And what about the families? The Democrats in the hearing offered hollow condolences for personal losses, but look at what they are doing to the Trump family. They are dragging his children into court. They are attacking his wife. They are trying to destroy the inheritance of his grandkids. It is a blood sport to them. Where is the decency that Joe Biden promised? Where is the return to normalcy? This is the most abnormal, indecent period in American political history, and it is entirely manufactured by the party that claims to be the compassionate ones. The media's role in amplifying Crockett's narrative is a key part of the feedback loop. They take her sound bites, strip out the context, and blast them out to millions of people to create a false consensus. They want you to think that everyone agrees Trump is a criminal. But when you go to a rally, when you go to a diner in the Midwest, when you talk to real people, you realize the media bubble is smaller than they think. The people see through the fog. They know that you don't indict a former president 91 times unless you are terrified of him winning. The restoring faith in government line that Democrats use is laughable. You don't restore faith in government by arresting the opposition leader. That destroys faith. That makes people believe the government is rigged. If they actually wanted to restore faith, they would have appointed a special counsel to investigate the Biden family corruption with the same vigor they use against Trump. They would be holding hearings on the millions of dollars that flowed from foreign entities into Biden shell companies. But they don't do that. They protect their own and persecute their enemies. That is the definition of corruption. Let's not forget the sheer pettiness of the gag order. They claim it is for the safety of the court staff. But Donald Trump has a Secret Service detail. He is one of the most protected men on earth. He is not going to go down to the courthouse and beat someone up. The gag order is about control. It is about humiliation. It is about telling the world, look, we can silence him, and there is nothing he can do about it. It is a power trip by a judge who is enjoying his 15 minutes of fame a little too much. The Republicans in the hearing were right to point out that this is election interference. Imagine if the roles were reversed. Imagine if a Republican prosecutor in Texas indicted Joe Biden for his border policy and demanded he sit in a courtroom in Amarillo for 6 weeks during the campaign. The Democrats would be calling for civil war. They would be burning down cities. But when they do it, they call it justice. The double standard is the only standard they have. As we look at the transcript, we see the blueprint for the next few years. If they get away with this, they will expand the target list. They will go after conservative influencers, journalists, and donors. They are already trying to debank conservatives, shutting down their accounts and cutting off their access to capital. This trial is just the tip of the spear. The goal is a one-party state where opposition is criminalized and dissent is silenced. Crockett's defense of the system ignores the fact that the system has been captured. The DOJ, the FBI, the IRS. These agencies have been filled with career bureaucrats who vote 95% Democrat. They are the deep state. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is a personnel chart. Trump tried to drain the swamp, and the swamp fought back. That is the story of the last 8 years. They are trying to kill the alligator before he drains the pond. We must also consider the international implications. The world is watching. China is watching. Russia is watching. They see a divided, weak America tearing itself apart. They see a justice system that looks more like a third-world dictatorship than the beacon of liberty. This weakness invites aggression. It is no coincidence that the world is on fire right now. Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. The bad guys see that the sheriff is too busy suing himself to keep the peace. The argument that Trump is threatening the judiciary simply by criticizing the judge is another faucet. In America, we have the right to criticize our government officials. Judges are government officials. They are not gods. They are not immune to criticism. If a judge is biased, we have a right to say so. If a prosecutor is corrupt, we have a right to say so. Trying to criminalize that criticism is a violation of the First Amendment, plain and simple. So, what is the endgame here? The Democrats hope that a conviction, any conviction, even for a jaywalking ticket, will give them the excuse to label him a convicted felon in every campaign ad. They think that label will scare off the suburban moms and the independents. But they are miscalculating. They are underestimating the anger of the American people. We don't care about their labels anymore. We care about the price of gas. We care about the border. We care about the fact that our country is falling apart while they play legal games. This hearing was a microcosm of the larger battle. On one side, you have the establishment, represented by Crockett, defending the corrupt status quo with slick talking points and procedural tricks. On the other side, you have the disruptors, the Republicans, trying to tear down the veil and show the American people the truth. It is a battle between the lies they tell us and the reality we live in. And remember, the ultimate jury is not the 12 people in Manhattan. The ultimate jury is the American electorate on November 5th. That is the verdict that matters. And that is why they are so desperate to stop us from getting there. They know that in the court of public opinion, they are losing. They know that the more they tighten their grip, the more the people slip through their fingers. We are witnessing the desperate flailing of a dying regime. The old guard knows their time is up. The populist wave is rising, and no amount of lawfare can stop it. They can indict him, they can gag him, they can try to bankrupt him, but they cannot break the bond between him and the people. In fact, every attack only makes that bond stronger. It is the Streisand effect on steroids. In the final section of our analysis, we will look at what you can do about this. Because sitting on the sidelines is no longer an option. This is not a spectator sport. This is a fight for your freedom. If they can take down a billionaire, they can take down you. We need to wake up, stand up, and speak out before it is too late. The clock is ticking, and the 60 minutes are almost up. Let's bring this home because we are in the final minutes of our analysis, and the stakes could not be higher. What we witnessed in that hearing room with Representative Crockett wasn't just political theater. It was a declaration of war against the dissenting half of this country. They are telling you, loud and clear, that they have the power, they have the courts, and they have the media, and they will use all of it to crush anyone who stands in their way. But here is the thing they forgot. They don't have you. They don't have the people. The entire Get Trump operation relies on the assumption that you will just accept it. They assume you will watch the news, see the headlines about felonies and gag orders, shake your head, and give up. They want you demoralized. They want you to think, what's the point? The system is rigged. But that is exactly what the establishment fears most: an awakened, engaged, and fearless citizenry that refuses to be gaslit. Look at the resilience of the MAGA movement. It hasn't shrunk, it has grown. It has evolved. It's no longer just about red hats and rallies. It's about a fundamental rejection of the lies we've been fed for decades. We now know the experts were wrong about the economy, wrong about the endless wars, and wrong about the border. And now, thanks to hearings like this, we know they are dead wrong about the justice system. The veil has been lifted. We see the strings. We see the puppet masters. Jasmine Crockett and her allies think they are the heroes of this story because they live in an echo chamber where CNN and MSNBC tell them they are saving democracy. But history will not be kind to them. History remembers the inquisitors, the witch hunters, and the censors as the villains. When the dust settles and the hysteria fades, people will look back at this era and ask, how did we let a local prosecutor hold a presidential election hostage over a bookkeeping entry? It will be viewed as a moment of national insanity. But we don't have the luxury of waiting for history to judge them. We have to act now. The immediate danger is that this lawfare sets a pattern that becomes permanent. If they succeed, every future election will be fought in the courtroom, not the ballot box. Every candidate will be drowning in subpoenas and indictments. The presidency will become a revolving door of legal battles, and the actual business of running the country, securing the border, fixing the economy, keeping us safe, will be ignored. Is that the America you want for your children? The Republicans in Congress, despite the media's attempts to mock them, are doing the dirty work of preserving our liberties. By putting these facts on the record, by challenging the narrative, they are holding the line. They are forcing the Democrats to defend the indefensible. Every time Crockett opens her mouth to defend a corrupt judge or a biased prosecutor, she alienates more independent voters who can see the unfairness with their own eyes. And let's be honest about the threat to democracy projection. They scream that Trump will be a dictator. But who is currently trying to remove their opponent from the ballot? Who is trying to bankrupt their opponent? Who is trying to silence their opponent? That is not the behavior of a Democratic Party. That is the behavior of a totalitarian regime. They are projecting their own sins onto Trump. It is the ultimate psychological trick. Accuse your enemy of that which you are guilty. This entire saga is a stress test for the Constitution. Can our founding documents survive a coordinated assault from within? Can the separation of powers hold up when one branch decides to cannibalize the other? The answer depends on us. The Constitution is just a piece of paper if the people don't demand that it be respected. We are the guardians of that document. So, what is the call to action here? It's simple. Don't fall for the narrative. When you see the breathless breaking news about the trial, turn it off. Do your own research. Read the transcripts. Look at the primary documents. Share the truth with your friends and family who might be swaying in the wind. The media relies on your ignorance. Your greatest weapon is your awareness. Support the fighters. Support the politicians, the journalists, and the influencers who are risking their careers to tell the truth. They are taking the arrows for you. The least we can do is have their backs. And most importantly, vote. Vote like your country depends on it, because this time, it actually does. They can rig a trial, they can skew a poll, but they cannot stop a landslide. If the turnout is big enough, the margin of cheating disappears. The vision of America that Jasmine Crockett represents is a bleak one. It's a vision of division, of identity politics, of bureaucratic control, and of a justice system that serves the state rather than the citizen. It is a vision where you are guilty until proven innocent, provided you are a Republican. We reject that vision. We believe in an America where the law is blind, where the border is secure, where the dollar is strong, where you can speak your mind without fear of being cancelled or sued. That America is still there, waiting for us to reclaim it. But we have to fight for it. We have to be willing to stand up to the bullies in the courtroom, in the media, and in Congress. The trial in New York is not the end. It is the beginning of the Great Awakening. It is the catalyst that is exposing the depth of the corruption. They thought they were burying Trump, but they were actually planting seeds. Seeds of skepticism, seeds of resistance, and seeds of a renewal that will sweep across this country in November. As we close this 60-minute journey, remember this: they are loud, but they are few. We are quiet, but we are many. They have the institutions, but we have the truth. And in the end, the truth always wins. It might take time, it might take pain, but it always wins. Keep your eyes open. Keep your powder dry. And never, ever let them convince you that fighting for freedom is a crime. The storm is here, but we are the storm. Thank you for listening. This has been a deep dive into the heart of the battle for America. Now, go out there and make your voice heard.